Okay, so let's go ahead and briefly go through chapter six. So chapter six deals with public opinion. Have y'all had a chance to kind of go through chapter six a little bit? Have y'all had a chance to kind of sift through it, kind of see what it's about? What are some of the topics that chapter six talks about? Have any of y'all had a chance to kind of go through it, or no, not really? Maybe some of y'all are still on spring break mode, and which that is a real thing. Like it's tough to kind of get back in the swing of things as well. And of course, like we talked about before. So that's fine. I mean, you'll have the rest of this week and the weekend, and early next week to go through it before the quizzes due. So, but yeah, that's fine. So let's kind of dive into public opinion really quickly. Public opinion is basically it defines itself, right? It's what the opinions that the public has, right? So we're gonna delve into what that is. Like, what does public opinion mean? See, now they're emailing me back and forth. Um, so we're gonna delve into public opinion, right? We're gonna take a look at what are some of the components of public opinion, such as political ideology. We're gonna take a look at, and this is one of my favorite chapters because we're gonna get into like people's political viewpoints. Like we're going to compare liberalism versus conservatism. We're going to break those down. We're also going to take a look at another important aspect of public opinion, which is political socialization. These are the factors that contribute to the political ideologies, the political viewpoints that you have. They all come from somewhere, right? We're not born with these. These are opinions and beliefs that we get from somewhere, right? So we're going to take a look at some of the factors that contribute to public opinion, right? Or I'm sorry, the right, we contribute to public opinion. We'll take a look at some of those factors here. So that's kind of in a nutshell what we're going to take a look at today here. So, okay, so let me go ahead and share the screen really quickly, and that way we can get started. So like I said, we'll skip around a little bit. That way we can cover everything that we need to here, at least the key points. So let's kind of go ahead and delve into here really quickly. So, okay, all right. So let's start the chapter. Let's start with public opinion here. Okay, so of course, we expect government to pay attention to the people, right? This is the whole notion of public opinion because the government is based on without the people, we don't have government, right? Because we the people, which is the title of the book, it's kind of like that Family Guy skit where like, oh, he said it, like so. But it's true, right? That's why the book is called We the People, right? Because we the people are the ones who provide the legitimacy for government, the power that government has, because the way that people serve within government is through fair and open elections, right? Through the voting process, which we're going to talk about this in the next couple of weeks. We've got a chapter on voting, we have a chapter on elections. So we're kind of going into that area, right? We're kind of moving towards the theme of this chapter is how does government get its power? And we're going to see we're going to see the different ways in which people get involved to give government power, right? It goes back to the social contract theory, the idea that we're going to give up some of our rights, because we can't do everything that we want to, right? Because then that would create a very chaotic society, right? So we give up some of those rights in exchange for government to create a safe society but not go too overboard, right? We kind of talked about this before, right? We don't Yes, we do want a safe and secure society, but not at the expense of our civil liberties, right? Right. We want to have those protections against too much government overreach, right? So again, in a nutshell, we've talked about these concepts before, but in a nutshell, because the people are the ones who have the power, because without people, the government is not able to exist, because we decide who serves in government through our votes, through these elections. We expect for government to pay attention to the people, but whose opinion gets represented in public policy where there are strong divides within the public, especially nowadays. I mean, I'm sure you all have seen that America is a pretty divided country politically, right? It's very divided. It's been divided before. I mean, this is not the first time that we've had severe political divisions. I mean, going back to the Civil War is another great example. Some people have said that this is the most that America has been divided since the Civil War. So there's kind of some back and forth on that. But it is interesting to see, right, that we see that America is, deeply divided politically. And so what happens, right? What happens when you have a country where there is a lot of this division and it's hard to find compromise on these issues? So ultimately you have a situation, and we will talk about political polarization later on in the class. you have a situation where people feel like there's winners and losers, right? Like the whole elections have consequences types of ideas. So there's a lot of so elections become very high stakes for that reason, right? Because since both of these sides are pretty opposite on the political spectrum, and because of a winner take all system where we have to have a winner and a loser, it becomes a situation where the other side feels really, that it feels really crushing for the other side if you don't win, kind of like what's been going on with the World Baseball Classic. And I was watching some of the games, the day before and yesterday. And so, um, but things like that, right? And we'll talk more about that, right? How influential is public opinion relative to other political forces, such as organized interest groups? So we will talk about how does the common person vote? How does that compare to the power that a lot of these special interest groups have and the organizing that they do? The fact that these interest groups, that's their job. They get paid to go and speak to elected officials to try to, lobby them to get them to, either agree or disagree with a bill that's being debated to pursue a certain policy. That's why, like, when I see a lot of my friends, they're over in Austin right now because they are, we've got the Texas legislative session right now. And sometimes I'm like, oh, it'd be nice to be able to have the time to go to that. But then I remember that my friends who are in Austin, it's because that's their job. They work for these nonprofits, for these organizations. So yeah, they can go to Austin because that's what they do. If I wanted to do that, I would have to do that on my own time. So, so it's kind of like it's an interesting thing, right? So they obviously have, you know, the time and the time to organize because that's what they do for a living. And how well informed, but the average person doesn't have that kind of time. How well informed are people, and by what channels can individuals make their voices heard? So this is another aspect, right? When you look at public opinion, does the public actually know what they're talking about? Do they know the intricacies of government? We talked about this in chapter 1, right? Remember we talked about how that not too many people have a lot of political knowledge. And so if you're not really informed, it's hard to have a starting point for what you want to do or what you want to accomplish when it comes to these political issues that you're concerned about. So you might have an idea about, hey, you know what, this isn't fair, like I want to see this changed. But if you don't know who to talk to, you don't know what level of government is responsible for this, it becomes a situation where it's very hard to be able to try to get involved in the political process, at least directly in that way, because as it says, by what channels can individuals make their voices heard? If people don't know the channels to tune into, then it's going to be a situation where it can become very difficult. So does this kind of make sense that when you talk about public opinion, it's not as straightforward as some people might make it sound to be, like, oh, well, the public, they want this or they want that. Do they really want that? And if they do, there's going to be different opinions about how they go about accomplishing those goals. I mean, you see this even in Congress, right? You see, one of the reasons why it's hard for Congress to get stuff accomplished is because you've got, like, especially in the House, you've got the 435 members of the House. And yes, you've got, for the most part, two political parties, although there's a few like libertarians and independents. But for the most part, you've got the two major parties. And even within those two parties, you've got disagreements. I don't know if you all recall the Kevin McCarthy voting fiasco that was going on at the beginning of the year, right? Where McCarthy couldn't get, he had to go through several rounds of voting in order to become the speaker. So, even within the political parties themselves, they can also have disagreements. And so research shows that public opinion does impact public policy, though. But scholars still debate whether the public is sufficiently informed about politics and whether elected officials represent the interests of all or just some Americans. So, yeah, this is a complex situation, which is further made complex because of the fact, and this is a fact because we have talked about this before, the fact that a lot of Americans are not informed about politics. They don't keep up with the news. We've mentioned before why that happens, right? It's not necessarily looking to place blame on people. It's just that it's difficult. It's difficult to keep up with the news. I always like to compare it to, like, if, let's say, you've never watched the news before, and then you start tuning in, and then you've got these CNN hosts who are referencing things from the 80s, like, so I get those references because I'm informed, right? I've been watching the news for many, many years. I've studied all this stuff. So if they're going to mention like Reaganomics, some people might be like, what is that? Like, I have no idea what that is because they haven't kept up with the news, right? It's like watching, right? It's like you catch you want to start a new show and you don't start at the beginning, right? You start in like season 5, episode 15. So of course you're not going to know what's going on because you haven't watched the previous season. So because it's hard it's hard to get informed if you're not already. It causes for people to really not bother because it's an insurmountable amount of work. So it's understandable why people do not they do not get informed about politics. Um, but unfortunately, that has a lot of effects on our current system because if the politicians don't trust the public to know what they're talking about or to know what's going on, then politicians can try to take advantage of that. They can because they know that no one's really watching C-SPAN or no one's really paying attention to what's being posted in the newspapers and things like that. Um, they can try to get away with some things. It's harder to do that at the national level because you've got the national newspapers are always covering Washington. All the newspapers have Washington correspondents, reporters that specifically focus on politics. But at the state and local level, you don't have that kind of media scrutiny and attention. So local leaders, they can certainly get away with a lot more stuff because the media is not really keeping an eye on them as much as at the national level. But again, that's a whole other story. But this is what we wanted to start off with, that while public opinion is extremely important, let's not discount that it isn't important because it definitely is. The issue, though, as you can see here, is that it's a very complex, layered um, situation where because the public isn't sure, the public isn't really united on stuff. There's differences, not even within what they believe in. There's differences within there. I think people have their beliefs, but it might not necessarily be based on facts. You probably heard the term fake news and alternative facts. There's a lot of that going on as well. So people can create their own realities based on things that aren't even true. We saw a lot of this with the COVID misinformation. Um, but regardless of that, those people still have those beliefs, and they will still use those beliefs to drive their political decisions, right? So you have to, you probably heard the phrase, what's the phrase? What's the phrase? What is it about reality that you make your own reality? Something like that. It's my mind is going blank on the phrase, but the point is that people can create those realities, and they can still use those realities to get involved in the political process, even if what they're basing it on is not necessarily true, right? So does this all kind of make sense in terms of why this is kind of a interesting but layered topic? Does this kind of make sense, or am I just kind of just rambling and just going all over the place? Does it kind of make sense, or not really, everyone? Like, does it kind of make sense, or not really? Just wanted to see if it makes sense really quickly, because I hope I'm not confusing you all with all this. Does it make sense, or not really? Just want to see if it does make sense. Let me see. Let me go over here. Okay, Ariana says makes sense. Okay, sounds good. Okay, all right. So that's kind of like the opening that's kind of like the opening idea that I wanted for us to talk about. So let's move over to some key terms, and then we'll move on to political ideology really quick. Okay. So some key terms regarding public opinion. So of course, public opinion is the citizens' attitudes about political issues, leaders, institutions, and events. So public opinion is pretty specific when it comes to how they view certain political issues, right? The leaders within government, right? This is how people view President Biden, right? So one of the most popular topics when you're talking about a president is their job approval ratings, right? And so that's an example of public opinion when it comes to a specific leader. Now, another thing I will mention about job approval ratings for presidents is that they always tend to be rather low. So I think what Biden's is at, like in the lower 40s, I think, or something like that. But that's not uncommon for presidents to have low approval numbers, because I've said this before, that the president gets the blame for everything, even for things that the president is not in control of. And the reason for that is because the president is at the top of the government, right? Even though, and again, most people don't know this, right? But the president is not in control of everything within government, right? We've talked before in federalism, right? How the president is confined to the executive branch, right? The legislature does, the legislative branch does their thing, the federal courts do their thing, and then state and local governments also operate independently from the president. But those people don't get the same blame that the president does because the president is at the top, right? The president gets a lot of attention. You know, people, you might have people that, oh, like, it's too hot today. Oh, thanks, Biden. They might say things like that. I know they do it like mockingly, but that does become a situation where the president is going to get a lot of blame even for things beyond their control because the president puts themselves out there, right? Being the leader of the free world, you're going to get a lot of the blame for things even beyond your control, as well as public opinion about the institutions, Congress, the Supreme Court. There's also polls that's done about like the confidence that people have in the Supreme Court. And I know in those recent polls, the Supreme Court confidence has gone down due to a lot of these recent cases, such as the Hobbs case, and of course, as well as political events and things like that. So how people view these circumstances and issues, that's what public opinion is. Okay, so let's take a look at values, right? So basic principles that shape people's opinions about issues and events, and then attitudes are a specific view about a particular issue, personality, or event. So these are similar in that values are considered like your baseline, so to speak, in terms of how the role that you see government. This also goes into political ideology a bit, so a lot of these are pretty similar, right? Political ideology is a cohesive set of beliefs that form a general philosophy about government, right? So political ideology, what it does is that it constructs, what your political ideology is basically your baseline for how you view government, right? What do you think government, like when you look at government, right? I'm sure some of y'all who are, if you're not like, if you don't have political opinions, you probably will after this class. You probably, are developing these political opinions in terms of, what government should or shouldn't do. What is the role of government? What should they get involved in? What should they not get involved in? How does government go about doing their jobs? What are the ideas that you want for government to pursue? That's considered political ideology because people who are politically engaged, they have a certain viewpoint about what government should be doing or not be doing. How much power should government have or not have? That goes into political ideology here. Attitudes, of course, are a specific view about a particular issue, personality, or event. So attitudes are a little bit more specialized. Again, it's a little bit more fine-tuned here, where you're looking at a particular issue. So if you have a political attitude, it's about a specific political issue, such as abortion or marriage equality and things like that. Whereas values are like your basic principles. Like a value would be like, oh, well, I tend to be really religious, so that also could influence my political viewpoints here. Or I tend to be very frugal with my money, so that's going to influence how you see the government spending, and you might feel that the government might spend too much or things like that. And of course, we've also talked about liberty and equality of opportunity before. Liberty, freedom from government control. The equality of opportunity, a widely shared American ideal that all people should have the freedom to use whatever talents and wealth they have to reach their fullest potential. So these two, when we're going to look at liberals and conservatives right now, these are the two major issues that they really tend to disagree on. Not necessarily that liberals don't believe in liberty or that conservatives don't believe in equality of opportunity. It's just that they rank them higher and lower on their list depending on which group they are. What I mean by that is that for conservatives, they would see liberty as more essential than equality of opportunity, whereas liberals are the opposite. Liberals view equality of opportunity more important than liberty, right? And that's what we're going to delve into right now. We're going to delve into those differing, political ideologies and how they and the aspects of how they do it. So let's go ahead and skip over here real quick. So let's get to political ideology. So political ideology is a set of underlying orientations, ideas, and beliefs here, right? As we mentioned, right? It's your basic philosophy about government, the role of government. Again, like I mentioned right now, right? Not just issues that government should work on, but how they should go about these issues, if they should go about these issues at all. So what we're going to look at here is we're going to take a look at the two major political ideologies, liberalism and conservatism, which I'm sure you all are very familiar with. I'm sure you all have heard these terms before. For the most part, they usually do tend to be synonymous with certain political parties, although not all the time. And we've also seen throughout American history that political parties have also shifted you know, the political parties have shifted their political ideologies. One great example is in the 1950s and 60s when the conservative Democrats, because if you remember, we'll talk more about this when we get to the political parties chapter. That originally the Democrats were conservatives. It was founded by Andrew Jackson, who was you know who him he was a conservative, and he founded the Democrat Party. And the Democrats, were the conservatives. Now, of course, the idea of, in terms of where this shifted, the shift occurred during the New Deal, where this is during FDR's administration, and then moving on to the civil rights movement in the 1950s and 60s, because during the New Deal, you still had um, the New Deal was an interesting time here. I don't know, I'm kind of skipping all over the place. Sorry about that. The New Deal was an interesting time because at the time, the major drivers when it came to political ideology was not social issues like it is today. So, like when we think of political ideology, I even mentioned it myself, right? I talked about abortion, marriage equality. Those are social issues. Back in the 1930s, people really didn't care about social issues because the economy was so bad. So the major political discussions that people were having was how to fix the economy, what to do about the economy because of the stock market crash and the Great Depression. So the Great Depression was what was on people's minds. It wasn't about, racism and ending, the separate but equal and all the Jim Crow laws. Well, I'm not saying that that wasn't important, but that wasn't at the forefront of everyone's mind. The economy was most pressing because, and as I've said before, that's it's understandable, right? You're not going to be concerned about social issues when you don't know when your next meal is going to come from. So during that time, you did have a situation where in the Democrat Party you had social conservatives and social liberals because what was uniting them was the economy. But nowadays, of course, it's different, right? Because now the social issues are what drive the political disagreements, right? And so in the 1950s and 60s, once the economy was getting better, then the social issues came back, and then a lot of these conservative Democrats left the Democrat Party to go become Republicans. Uh, and so starting in like the 50s and 60s, that's where we started to see that shift to where now the parties look like the way they do today. So, but again, that's an example of a political realignment, which we'll talk more about that later on. In the United States, of course, the definitions of liberalism and conservatism have changed over time. It talks about how the old school liberalism actually used to be conservatism. In terms of this idea of smaller government, being more responsible with government spending, just not having the government get involved in personal affairs. That was old school liberalism. But now, of course, that's changed. Contemporary liberalism and conservatism are differences in emphasis with regard to the fundamental American political values of liberty and equality, just so like we were talking about here earlier, right? That the idea is that liberals and conservatives have disagreements about the levels of liberty and equality and which of these two they find more vital to political discussions here, right? So let's kind of break this down here a bit. Okay. So in classic political theory, let's talk about liberalism, right? So in classic political theory, a liberal meant something different than the current definition. The classic definition was someone who favored individual entrepreneurship and was suspicious of government in managing economic and social affairs, right? So again, this sounds very much like a modern day conservative, someone who believes in economic liberty to be able to work for yourself, start your own business, basically not have to work for someone, right? You become your own self-made person, and you want for the government to leave you alone. The government's not going to get involved in taxing you too much or being concerned with how you live your personal life on your property, right? This was what a liberal was in the classical sense. But again, so now this has changed to where now a liberal today, in politics today, a liberal is someone who generally supports government intervention in the economy, more economic equality, expansion of federal social services, and a greater concern for consumers and the environment. So let me see. I think it goes a little bit more into detail here, right? So what all this talks about here, everyone, is that when we look at today's, liberal, a liberal is someone who, if you look at the economy, they tend to favor strong government involvement, right? So government intervention in the economy. What this means here is that liberals are in favor of that they're in favor of more regulation of the economy. I don't know if you all heard the story a couple of days ago, right? You all heard about the failing of the Silicon Valley Bank, right? You all heard about that. That's been in the news for the last couple of days here, and so that was an issue that let me check the chat really quickly. So oh, sorry about that. Hold on. I keep clicking out of everything. Sorry about that. Let me see. Let me check the chat here really quickly. Okay, yes, you heard about that, right? Um, so yeah, so this whole notion of banks going under and having the FDIC insure deposits and all that. That's something that goes back to the FDR days, right? We talked about that a little bit when we talked about the New Deal policies, because that was when you had the bank runs. So this is kind of like a modern day bank run, so to speak, right? Where um, and ultimately, the bank ended up failing. So of course now they're investigating why it happened. Um, but in terms of what this has to do with what we're talking about, liberals don't trust, or they don't really trust the private sector. They feel that the private sector might not always be in the best interest of the workers. Liberals will point to historical events such as the union busting that was going on during the Gilded Age. I don't know if y'all, this is more like this is more history, but this was back when labor was trying to organize. This is where you had the industrial workers of the world. You also had the AFL, begin in the during this time, and you had these labor groups that were trying to unionize because to fight back against the really poor and unfair working conditions. But then you had companies that were trying to break up the strikes and all that. Um, so liberals will point to historical events that will say, hey, um, we've allowed for corporations to pretty much operate without any type of regulation, and so the corporations had their shot. They were exploiting the workers, and so now we need more government involvement through regulations, such as OSHA regulations, that with workplace safety and things like that. The economic equality, right? So liberals are more in favor of raising taxes on wealthier earners, right? Because liberals feel that they can afford it, right? Because because if they're making more, then they should pay their fair share, right? They should pay more, and to also cut taxes on lower income workers, because since they don't make that much, they shouldn't have to share more of the tax load when it comes to taxes, right? So they believe in a more equitable tax system here, right? So let me see. Let me go back to the privatization of social services is for the benefit of corporate America only, right? So yes, Emma, yes. When you're talking about, obviously, of course, and this has been going on for a while. This has been uh, conservatives. They have not been in favor of a lot of the spending when it comes to the social services, and so right, and we'll get into conservatives right now in terms of their viewpoint on social services and how they feel that the free markets and privatization uh, would be a better viewpoint, right? So but again, we'll talk about their view. But you definitely bring up a very good point in terms of something that is going on, right? Like the privatization of like we've seen it in the Texas legislature with the school voucher programs. We've also seen it with like Medicare, the Medicare Advantage plans and things like that, with the private sector getting involved in some of these government services and things like that. So yeah, it is a very divisive issue, right, in terms of how people view the privatization of social services. I mean, we've also seen it with the post office too, right? There's been calls to privatize it as well. So, but yes, we will get into the argument for that here in a bit. But yes, but you are right that that is something that is going on, and right, and so liberals definitely want to expand more of these federal social services programs, right? To expand more eligibility. Bernie Sanders, he talks about this, right? He wants to expand Medicare for everyone, right? President Joe Biden also talked about lowering the Medicare age to 60, and to expand more federal social services, to expand the money for those social services, as well as greater concern for consumers and the environment, right? So again, to liberals don't trust the private sector to protect consumers. That's why you also have other senators like Liz Warren from Massachusetts. She's been very big um, on her big thing is on consumer protection, especially when it comes to like credit cards and interest rates that people pay for, on credit cards and the payday loans and all the interest that you pay there. Some of these loans tend to be predatory, where they're always sending you stuff through the mail to try to, get you to pay these. I know that's happened to me before. Like I got one payday loan a couple years ago, and now every day I'm getting mail from these payday lenders. It's like they put you in the system, and then it's like they never leave you alone because they want you to they want more business from you. So uh but yes, so that's one aspect. And then of course the environment, right? So liberals tend to be more in favor of environmental protection. We've also seen this like when it comes to like the border wall and things like that. Liberals tend to not be in favor of that because they feel that there could be environmental concerns for constructing a wall. There next to the Rook Island and things like that. So, but again, as well as other areas such as another issue that liberals also have. They bring up the environment is when it comes to like offshore oil drilling, like in Alaska. They call it the ANWR, the National Wildlife Reserve. And so that's been a battle too. The Keystone Pipeline also in the Dakotas has also been an issue that liberals have been against, right, because of the environmental impacts that could have, right? So, but and of course this talks a little bit more about going more into detail, right? So liberals support taxing those with more income or wealth more heavily, the expansion of federal social service and healthcare programs, government spending on education, on infrastructure, and on science and technology. So liberals also have a disagreement with how the government spends their money. So especially when it comes to like defense spending, liberals tend to they want to see less defense, less funding on the military, less funding on national defense, and instead they want for that money to be used in other areas such as education, right? There's liberals want to pay teachers more to I've never understood this whole notion of teachers having to spend their own money to fund their classrooms. I've never understood that. I had to do that too many years ago, and I don't get it. I mean, so that's something that liberals are wanting to work on, right? To provide more pay for teachers and more support for them. Infrastructure too, right? To be able to repair a lot of the old bridges. I mean, you also saw what happened with the railroad, with the railroad derailment in Ohio, right? With the sad situation that happened there, right? So there's been discussion about hey, we need to rebuild the old bridges that were built during the New Deal. Some people have talked we need like a second New Deal, right, to be able to repair everything that we built back then, right? And of course on science and technology, right? To be able to provide more funding for STEM programs, right, and more research, right? Not to be cutting funding from like NASA and all of these other government institutions, but to increase funding, right? Efforts to protect minorities and women from discrimination. Uh, so of course this talks about like pay equity for women, as well as creating safer work environments for women, reproductive rights for women and LGBTQ rights, and protecting the rights of immigrants, right? So liberals they tend to also be they tend to be pro-choice when it comes to the abortion issue. They also are in favor of marriage equality. There's been protests in Austin the last I know like a couple of days ago, right? There was an LGBTQ protest in Austin because of what's going on in the legislature. So liberals tend to be in favor of minorities and their ability to be able to live their lives, and as well as protecting the rights of immigrants, right? So liberals believe in um, liberals believe in a humane immigration process where people still need to obey the law, right? But they need to be treated humanely and respectfully, and things like that. Liberals are in favor of creating opportunities for equality. Yes, that's exactly right, Emma. And while they're in favor of legalizing marijuana, they seek more regulation of guns and assault weapons that have been linked to increased violence, right? So when it comes to the gun control issue, right, they tend to be stricter on it than conservatives are. We've talked about the gun issue before, right? The liberals, they feel that there's issues with the access of guns, the types of guns that are being purchased, and so liberals would like to see more regulation of the gun industry, right, and having more of those safeguards put in place. And they also are in favor of legalizing marijuana because liberals feel that that is a personal issue and that it's not the government's business to be engaging, to be going and it. Liberals feel that it's not the government's business to be deciding, uh, you know, what people put in their bodies, so to speak, right? So that's where we're at when it comes to liberals. So does this all make sense in terms of how liberals view these issues? Does this kind of make sense, or not really? I think this should make sense, and a lot of this you all know already before, because I'm sure a lot of you all are very politically minded here. So let's go to the flip side. So pretty much on the opposite side, we're going to look at conservatives, and we're going to see how conservatives view these issues. And as you're going to see, this is going to be easy to remember because conservatives are pretty much the opposite of liberals here. So conservatives are people who generally support the social and economic status quo. What this means is they do not want for things to change, right? That's the whole notion of the word conservative, right? They want to conserve how society is. They want to keep it at a homeostasis type of level. And you also have situations where conservatives will also maybe try to roll back, roll back things, such as what we saw with the Hobbs case, right? To move, to kind of move back to the way things were earlier in society. Are suspicious of efforts to introduce new political formulas and economic arrangements, and believe that a large and powerful government poses a threat to citizens' freedom. So again, so liberals are more in favor of a larger, expanded government because liberals feel that government's role within society is important, especially when it comes to certain marginalized groups. Conservatives do not agree with the large government, right? They feel conservatives are more in favor of local government, which definitely also makes a lot of sense here, everyone, because the idea that the conservative idea when it comes to lesser government, smaller government, is that they feel that your local government officials are going to be more in tune to the needs and concerns of the community as opposed to people over in Washington, right? Washington's kind of far away. They might not necessarily know exactly what's going on the ground here with when it comes to society, right? So that's a more conservative idea. The idea to allow for more local control of government, and to respect local government and what they're doing, right? And this is how America originally started, right? Where if we go back to chapter 2, remember we talked about how that originally Great Britain kind of just let the colonies kind of do their own thing. They were just kind of self-governing. So this is how America has, for the most part, always been, right? This idea of having smaller, more local governments kind of take the lead on things. Although we've seen changes, and we've seen changes, to where now Washington tends to have more influence than ever before here. But yeah, so conservatives, they definitely do want to keep things the way they are, and they are suspicious of these efforts. Like when it comes to like income and wealth redistribution, they're not in favor of that, right? So conservatives, they tend to support cutting taxes and reducing government spending and regulation of business, right? So let me give you all the conservative argument for why, because I gave you all the liberal argument, right? Let me give you the conservative argument for why conservatives do not favor too much regulation, and they do not favor higher taxes. So the conservative argument is that you don't want to tax the higher income earners because that would de-incentivize people to try to innovate, to try to move up within society. Because if they're going to be taxed for all this extra money that they're going to be making, then what's the point of trying to move up, right? So conservatives feel that they don't want to have the wealthier people pay so much in taxes, because that would create a situation that would create a situation where people might not want to keep moving up within society. So that's their argument. So, and of course this also just goes to the argument about cutting taxes in general, right? The conservatives do not support the government being as large as it is, right? A lot of conservatives feel that a lot of these government programs are wasteful, that they're not useful. So like a lot of conservatives aren't in favor of the Department of Education because they feel that and they'll mention that in the Constitution. They'll say that, well, education is not supposed to be a federal involvement anyway. It's supposed to be up to the states because it's the 10th Amendment and things like that. So conservatives don't even believe in some of these agencies like education, the IRS. You probably heard of some of these. There was a plan that was being floated out by Republicans where they wanted to eliminate the income tax. They wanted to eliminate the payroll taxes. The taxes that you pay on your, whenever if you're working, and they wanted to replace it with a sales tax, right? So you would only be taxed on what you spend. But the kicker with that is that the sales tax would go up a lot. So when I first saw that, I was like, okay, the money has to come from somewhere, right? It's not like they're going to, because if you're not going to have income tax and payroll tax, that's really going to cut in to a lot of the tax revenue. So the money has to come from somewhere. And so, yeah, that was what it was, right? That they're going to increase the sales tax and things like that. So there's been discussion and debate about that, in terms of how people view those issues. But yeah, so conservatives are in favor of cutting taxes across the board, especially for the more wealthier people, reducing government spending, like I mentioned, cutting some of these programs, as well as regulation of businesses, right? Not having as many regulations and kind of letting the free market dictate, because this goes back to the laissez-faire capitalism that we talked about before. The argument for why conservatives do not want to have too much regulation of business is because conservatives feel that the business owners know best. The business owners who are successful, they know what they're doing. They're the business people, right? So we should kind of cater to what they're doing because they have the expertise. So the conservatives feel that's why conservatives, they tend to hold millionaires and billionaires in higher regard, because they point to the fact that they're rich, so they must be rich for a reason, right? So that's the conservative argument as to why they tend to, they tend to. What I'm trying to say is that I'm not necessarily saying that they let the business people kind of make up the rules, but they definitely defer to them to for their expertise and things like that. That's why Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, they tend to have a lot of influence when it comes to what government does, because of the wealth that they have, because they have that wealth for a reason. Conservatives also believe in traditional family arrangements. This includes opposition to legalize abortion and same-sex marriage, right? So let me kind of sum this up again really quickly. So liberals when it comes to the economy, they tend to be very progressive, right? They tend to want government involvement in the economy, but they don't want government involvement within your personal life. That's liberals. Conservatives are the opposite. Conservatives are against government involvement in the economy, but they are for government involvement in personal issues. And the reason for this is because a lot of conservatives also tend to be very religious, right? So there usually is that link between conservatives and religion, right? So they tend to believe in those traditional family values, heavily influenced by religious doctrine, especially like the Bible and things like that. They tend to believe in marriage being between one man and one woman. They tend to be against abortion because they feel that it's murder and things like that. So their religion definitely influences their viewpoints, so that's why a lot of these evangelicals are conservatives for that reason. Stricter criminal justice laws. This includes opposition to recreational drug legalization. So conservatives are also, a lot of conservatives are for the death penalty, as well as stronger stronger sentences for criminal offenses, including so they're not in favor of legalizing marijuana, and then military intervention abroad and the maintenance of American military power. So they definitely are in favor of having a strong military and things like that. So, okay, let's kind of go through this really quickly because we just have a few minutes left. So other ideologies define libertarianism, someone who emphasizes freedom and believes in voluntary association with small government. So libertarians are interesting because they're kind of a mix of liberals and conservatives, where libertarians are, they're conservative when it comes to the economy, and they're also, what I mean by that is that they're not in favor of high taxes. They're more for small government. They're not in favor of like minimum wage laws and things like that. They feel that the market should decide how much people get paid. But they're also against government involvement with their personal life, right? So libertarians tend to also favor marijuana legalization. So one of the most famous libertarians is Senator Rand Paul. He ran for president in 2016 based on his opposition to foreign wars and his commitment to civil liberties and smaller government. So he's actually the current senator from Kentucky. His dad, Ron Paul, was a congressman from the Lake Jackson area. Interesting story. My ex-girlfriend was from Lake Jackson, and she actually lived just a few houses down from where Ron Paul used to live. They lived in the exact same neighborhood. I actually drove by his old house, and it was just maybe like 3 or 4 houses down from my ex-girlfriend's house. So I don't know. Lake Jackson's a really nice community. I actually like it a lot. Let's see. You voted for Gary Johnson. Yes, yes. So yes, he was in 2016, right? And I do have a good video that discusses Gary Johnson's libertarian views. So yes, you definitely know what I'm talking about. And then let's go to socialism, right? So someone who generally believes in social ownership, strong government, and reducing economic inequality. So, of course, obviously the most famous socialist is probably Bernie Sanders. He calls himself a democratic socialist and emphasizes equality of opportunity. So if you know anything about me, you definitely know how big of a fan I am of Bernie Sanders. But what I also want to mention really quickly is that let's just kind of also be real when it comes to socialism, because a lot of people have a lot of negative viewpoints about socialism. They equate it to tyranny and all that, when in reality that's not the case. Now, other tyrannical countries have used the concept of socialism to mask their authoritarianism, but that's a different story, right? The point here is that socialism, in terms of the actual textbook definition, is someone who generally believes in social ownership, strong government, and reducing economic inequality. So these are what you would say very liberal viewpoints, right? In terms of having, a stronger government to, create more regulations, have, more of a equitable tax system, and having more social ownership when it comes to when it comes to a lot of the programs that we have. We actually do have a lot, a mix of some of this, right? With Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, those, you can make an argument that those are socialist types of ideas, right? And things like that. So yeah, so whenever someone always mentions Venezuela, you also have to mention, well, but there's also the Swedish country, Sweden, and the Norwegian countries, right? The Scandinavian countries, right? So anyway, so okay, really quickly, let's get to political socialization really quickly, and then we'll end here for today. So let's talk about where some of these viewpoints come from. So people's attitudes about political issues and elected officials tend to be shaped by their underlying political beliefs and values. So political socialization, which is the induction of individuals into the political culture, learning the underlying beliefs and values on which the political system is based on, right? So this is where people first learn about politics, and they first learn about political viewpoints and ideas and where they and how they end up becoming political. So there are what are called agents of socialization, and some examples are social institutions, including families and schools, that help to shape individuals' basic political beliefs and values. So let's kind of, I know we're kind of rushing through this, so let's kind of finish here. So our political attitudes and values are shaped by family and friends. This is where we usually tend to first get our political viewpoints. Children tend to absorb the political viewpoints of their parents. Now, I can also say this for myself, that this is where I first started learning about politics. I've shared with you all before that it was my grandpa who first told me about politics and the importance of it. And he told me about, and the reason why my grandpa was very political, I think I also shared with you all that my grandpa did go to rallies in the 60s in California with the United Farm Workers, because in the 60s he was out in California. He was a migrant farmer back in the 1960s over in California. So he did go to those rallies, and he became very political because of those rallies, because of the unfair treatment of of the Mexicanos out there, and how they were being exploited by the companies, right? I'm sure you all heard of they were being sprayed pesticides while they were out in the fields, right? I mean, just and they were getting sick with cancer and all this, and viva la raza, yes, absolutely, yes. So that's where my grandpa first became political, and he passed that on to me. And my mom, for a long time, wasn't really political, not because she didn't want to, but because she just didn't have the time to pay attention. Now that she's retired, she's more political than I am. She's telling me about things that I don't even know about because she has the time. So now my mom is extremely political. So that's where a lot of us first get it. Social networks also have a big influence. Political scientist Betsy Sinclair argues that individuals are social citizens whose political opinions and behavior are significantly influenced by their social networks. So online social networks such as Facebook and Twitter may increase the role of peers in shaping opinions and raise attention to salient problems. Oh yes, oh yeah. I'm one of those few people that post politics all day on my Facebook. I'm sure some of y'all know you probably have a friend where that's all they do is just post politics. I mean, that's not necessarily me because I also post sports, but most of the stuff I post is political, which makes sense because I'm a political scientist, political activist, whatever you want to call me. So it definitely makes sense that I do that. And sometimes I get pushback, and as I've said before, I don't have a problem with disagreements. It's just the way you disagree is where I draw the line. So if you're being abrasive about it, no, I'm not gonna say, yeah, no, no. I know a lot of people have unfollowed me, but that's fine. Whatever. That's their right to do so. And it's also my right to have my opinions about them unfollowing me. So that's fine. Okay, let's kind of move over here really quickly. So let's go through education and then race and ethnicity, and then we'll finish for today. So the other additional influences are education. Americans also acquire basic beliefs in liberty, equality, and democracy from their formal education. So, this is a great example, right? You all are learning about politics here in this class because it's a general requirement. So I'm sure you're going to be made aware of some of these political ideas, and then you can formulate your own opinions, right? People who attend college often have different political opinions than those who do not, which is very straightforward because not everyone takes government 2305, 2306, right? So people who don't go to college aren't necessarily going to be exposed to this. I know they're supposed to be in high school because you're supposed to take government as a senior, but I don't know how well the government teachers are doing. Sometimes it's because I get a lot of complaints from my students, where they tell me like, "Sir, I didn't know about this. Like, they didn't teach us this," and I'm like, "Well, didn't you have government in high school?" And I'm like, "Yeah, but it was a coach, and he wasn't really like teaching us anything." So it's just it's an unfortunate situation. So hopefully, I can try to fill in the gaps here. Higher levels of education increase the likelihood of engaging in behaviors that increase political knowledge, such as following the news. Uh, and of course, and this also happened to me as well because when I got to college, I first got it. I know we're already over time. Let me just give me just a few more minutes and then we'll finish here for today. Uh, I know when I got to college, I had been exposed to politics before, but I wasn't like as into it as until I got to college and I started taking like sociology classes. I started learning about Karl Marx, Emil Durkheim, Max Weber. I started learning about some of these famous sociologists, and it was just it was an eye opener in terms of looking at these different perspectives. And so that really did influence me to become very political because of the knowledge that I was learning. So yes, definitely learning all this stuff in college will definitely increase your political knowledge, and that'll translate to to political actions and things like that. So, okay, excuse me. So social groups also influence political attitudes. Race and ethnicity. African Americans often perceive their fate as linked with the fate of other Black Americans. So that's why, and we'll talk more about this when we get to the voting chapter. We'll talk about how African Americans tend to be very united politically, especially when it comes to their support of the Democrat Party. Latinos are a little bit different because while they usually do tend to vote Democrat, we're also seeing some of that change where a lot of them are moving to the Republican Party. We'll talk more about that when we get to that chapter. But shared ethnicity among Latinos contributes to group consciousness. But the shared group consciousness is not quite as strong as with the African Americans here. Gender gap also exists. Differences in social roles and occupation patterns between men and women lead to differences in political opinion. So we also see this as well, right? Where men tend to be more conservative than women. Not always the case, but this, sometimes more often than not, this usually, tends to be a factor here. This also exists when it comes to like different professions, right? So, because I'm sure you all are aware that some professions tend to be dominated by women. When it comes to like nursing and teaching and things like that, you tend to see more women than men, and then in other fields like like trucking and law enforcement, that tends to be more dominated by men, right? So that's why those occupations can also have an influence in terms of your political viewpoints here as well. Let's see, really quickly, let's kind of go through. Okay, religion and party affiliation, last ones, and then we'll end for today. So religion also has a big influence, strong predictor of opinion on issues of morality or family. White evangelicals and weekly churchgoers hold the most conservative views. So we kind of touched on this a bit, right? That these evangelicals usually tend to be conservative because of those values that they have that's reinforced by their by their religious viewpoints. And then party affiliation, right? Self-identified partisans tend to rely on party leaders and the media for cues on the appropriate positions to take on major political issues. And some have called partisanship today a mega identity. Americans' political identities are now strongly tied to social identities such as race or religion, while opinions on policy issues are becoming less important here, right? So this also talks a little bit about how people perceive themselves when it comes to a community, right? And when it comes to affiliations within their community, right? Where that could also influence how they view certain issues, so to speak, right? And things like that. So, okay, so I know I could go a little bit more detail on that, but I know we're already out of time. So let's kind of end here for today. So, okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for sticking by. Sorry that we went over a little bit, but I hope this made a little bit more sense in terms of chapter 6 here. Uh, so next week we're going to get to chapter 8. We're going to talk about we'll talk about that'll be the voting chapter. So we should be able to finish that next week, and then after that we'll get to the political parties, and then we'll continue to work our way through the second unit, and then after that we'll get to the third unit, which deals with Congress, the presidency, and the federal courts. So we'll work on that towards the end of the class here, the end of the semester. So anything else that I can help you out with before we end for today? Anything else? Okay, nothing else, everyone. So, okay, the exam. Okay, yes. Lockdown was not working. Okay. All right. Okay. So, what do you? Okay, let me stop the recording here.